Just a few months ago, what I wanted to share with you seemed impossible. One of the continent's most developed economies, a major African country, had just issued rules criminalizing owning their own money. And they didn't even hide the culprit. The 17th of April, 2026 is an important day. It was then that South Africa's National Finance Ministry abandoned what was supposed to be closely watched by crypto investors around the world. We're not talking about small-scale tax updates or licensing requirements. This is existential. This is about the basic right to own and control assets. Stay, because I'll analyze in detail what happened, why it is important to your portfolio, and most important, what it means for the future of global encryption. Regulation. This is not hype. This is not fear-mongering, but what official government documents actually say. Let me set a scenario for you. South Africa is not a trivial player in cryptocurrencies. We're talking about a country where about 4.2 million people own cryptocurrencies, or 7.1% of the population. Some estimates put that higher at 5.8 million, or 9.4% of the national population. What really stands out is that 1 in 5 South Africans now either own or use cryptocurrencies. By 2030, that figure is expected to reach 43% of the population. South Africa is not just a crypto market. Yes, it is Africa's encryption hub, but the 17th of April, 2026, completely changed that. The US Treasury and the Reserve Bank of South Africa, SARB, issued the draft capital Flow Management Regulations 2026. This is the first comprehensive reform of South Africa's foreign exchange control framework in more than 60 years. Those rules, which have existed since the apartheid era of 1961, are now being weaponized against cryptocurrency holders. The timing is particularly striking. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced in his 2026 budget speech in February that this would happen again, but no one expected it to be so extreme. For years, the industry has been discussing with government officials what modern encryption regulation should look like, which is considered wise, proportionate, and even good for business. They didn't get it. It looks like a financial crackdown, wrapped in modern language. Farzam Asani runs Val, Africa's largest cryptocurrency exchange. Millions of South Africans buy and sell Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other digital assets on the platform. Days after the rules were lifted, Mr. Ashani made public his harsh response. He said bluntly, "In many ways, this is a cautionary document. The bill gives the Treasury Department and law enforcement officials broad powers to search and seize any currency, crypto assets, gold, or securities found to be in violation." This is not the kind of language you can easily use when talking about government. Let me show you the specific rules. And that is it. First, declaration requirements. If you own cryptocurrencies in South Africa, you will have 30 days to report to the National Finance Ministry, not banks, not financial advisors, to the Treasury itself. It is not just a temporary notice. Your statement must include the exact time you purchased the cryptocurrency, how you purchased it, the exact location you currently hold, and the specific value you have. Now, No one in the government seems to have solved the problem. They never specified the amount that triggered the request. The draft mentions assets above the threshold, but does not define the threshold anywhere. How do people comply with the law when they don't even know what triggers demand? This is indeed shocking. Kel Van Wyk founded Moneybridge, a fintech company that makes Bitcoin payments through major retailers like Pick and Pay. He also co-founded Luno, one of South Africa's largest crypto exchanges, and knows more about the land than almost anyone else. He said one important thing publicly: time is not enough for such a large scale reform. Industry, civil society, and the public deserve a meaningful opportunity to participate. But Mr. Van Wyck's disclosures are more telling. Consider that South Africa is actually going backward while the rest of the world is moving forward. Second, mandatory sales terms. Once you announce encryption, what happens next? The Treasury or an authorized dealer of their choice can force you to sell cryptocurrencies to them, and they will pay you in South African rand. The problem, they pay you by market value. This is a tax disguised in regulatory language. Once declared, these assets cannot be sold or transferred without the permission of the Ministry of Finance. If you no longer need cryptocurrency for the purposes you stated when you submitted your documents, the law requires you to immediately offer to sell cryptocurrency to the government at any price determined by the government. This is extraordinary. This is what you read in dystopian novels, not the laws of Africa's major economies. In the 21st century. Third, restrictions on movement. Cryptocurrencies may not be purchased without written permission, except through an approved service provider. You can't sell, you can't borrow, you can't borrow, you can't lend, you can't lend. Transfer to people outside South Africa. You can't use it for international payments. This essentially makes encryption a state-controlled asset. Every major action requires bureaucratic approval. Fourth, private key leaks, which is the real nightmare. Now let's look at Article 25, Paragraph 5. This is a rule that has caused an absolute uproar, and for good reason. Under the rule, law enforcement officials can force you to hand over your password, PIN, private key, basically everything you need to access and control cryptocurrencies. If you refuse, it is a criminal offense and carries a heavy sentence. Your private key is like the password for your entire financial life. They spread cryptocurrencies because you control your money, not the bank, not the government. If you're forced to give up, that is the end of financial privacy. This is the end of self-policing. This is where it has become even more dystopian. Nothing in the regulations prevents border agents from detaining you because they suspect you may have a Bitcoin seed, phrase in your head a remembered password, and ask you to hand it over. If you refuse, you could face criminal charges. Stephen Sidley, a finance expert and professor at the University of Johannesburg, who specializes in encryption, said it was using old methods designed for completely different economies. He was absolutely right. This is not regulation. This is control. Fifth, search and seizure powers. Law enforcement officers can search you at airports and border checkpoints. They can search your phone for encryption-related apps. They can seize your assets on the spot if they suspect you have violated these rules, which do not clearly define what is reasonable. It is basically up to the person who checks you at the border. 6. Penalty structure. Violations are as follows: a maximum fine of 1 million rand, or about $60,000, up to 5 years in prison, or both. This is a serious criminal penalty for what most developed democracies do through civil or tax laws. You could be jailed for holding cryptocurrencies above unspecified thresholds. After the rules were lifted, Frank Leonet, the operator of Afrodax, South Africa's authorized crypto exchange, warned immediately that they could drive encryption and investors out of South Africa entirely. He was absolutely right. Why would any legitimate encryption business operate under such hostile regulatory frameworks? There is also a particularly sinister aspect. These rules are supposed to be risk-based and modern, but they are by no means. Bitcoin Czar, an advocacy group, makes this perfectly clear. The draft regulations contradict the promised risk-based approach. Instead of targeting truly high-risk activities, the draft applies a simple license-based system to all encrypted assets. It equates self-managed Bitcoin transfers with large institutional flows. This directly undermines the modern risk-based framework promised in the 2026 budget. They did it right. You might wonder why South Africa did this, and what prompted the regulatory response to be so extreme. The answer involves a court case, a loophole in the law, and what appears to be a government panic. Last May, the High Court heard Standard Bank v. the Reserve Bank of South Africa. Here is what happened. Leo Cash and Arbitrage transferred about 4,405 bitcoins, about $556 million from South Africa to a cryptocurrency exchange in Seychelles. Saab tried to seize the funds, saying the transfers violated foreign exchange controls. But that is what makes it interesting. The court had to answer a basic question: is cryptocurrency even part of the Exchange Control Act? And was Bitcoin classified as currency or capital in 1961? The court's answer shocked Saab. No, cryptocurrencies do not fall within the definition of currency or capital under the existing exchange control framework. Justice Mossa wrote a meaningful essay. For me, cryptocurrencies are not within the capital limit of Reg 10(1)(c) in any interpretation, let alone restrictive interpretation. I agree with the applicant's lawyers that a cryptocurrency regulatory framework is long overdue. That has created huge legal divisions. Technically, South Africans can move encryption across borders without any government approval or notice under written law. That could be a nightmare for central bank and treasury officials. Rather than accept the court's decision, Saab appealed. The problem: instead of waiting for an appeal, the government decided to overhaul the rules by introducing encryption into the exchange control framework through new legislation. This is where the regulation of capital flows comes in. It was a legislative overreaction to court rulings they disliked. But you need more background. Enoch Godongwana, South Africa's finance minister, made his intentions clear as early as his national budget speech in February 2026, when he announced the inclusion of encryption technology in the capital flow management framework as part of what they called the modernization of South Africa's financial infrastructure. Here is the story, though. South Africa began imposing exchange controls in 1961, initially designed for 65 years of completely different economic times. Most developed countries have eliminated those controls altogether. In fact, former President Nelson Mandela made it clear in his 1996 State of the Union address whether these controls will be phased out is not a question for us. But when, 30 years later, instead of phasing them out, Enoch Gordon Warner made them stronger and more aggressive. Even Tito Mboweni, a former SARB president, said in 2005 that exchange controls have become meaningless for all intents and purposes. Gerhard de Kock, the apartheid-era governor of the Reserve Bank, said monetary controls allowed more money to flow out rather than in. So, in one case, the court ruled that encryption was not subject to foreign exchange controls, and the government decided to change the law rather than accept the ruling, expanding a framework that even the former central bank governor considered meaningless. They do it under the guise of modernity, and in fact, they do the opposite. Let me tell you how this happened. The speed and secrecy of the process speak volumes. The 25th of February, 2026, Finance Minister Gordon Warner delivered his 2026 budget speech, announcing the inclusion of encryption in the capital flow framework, which most believe means some kind of licensing and reporting requirements. Reasonable, normal. Other countries, too. The 3rd of March, 2026, the Financial Supervision Department of the State Administration of Foreign Exchange issued Notice Number 3 on Foreign Exchange Management in 2026, confirming that it will be revised soon. But no one really knows how extreme they will be. The 17th of April, 2026, boom, the Treasury Department and SARB have issued a full draft of the regulations, which are shockingly extreme. Now, it is politically interesting. The government gave the public a full 22 working days to submit comments. It took less than a month to analyze regulatory changes across the country to how encryption technology is handled. Kel Van Wyk immediately called it inadequate. The original deadline was the 10th of June, but it was later changed to May 18 or less. This is no accident. It was intentional. You announce extreme things, you give people little time to organize responses. And by the time they do, the rules are in place. But something unexpected happened. South Africa's crypto community has embraced more. They organized. In April 2026, the same month as the deregulation, 3 passionate Bitcoin advocates, Francois Harris, Gareth Grobler, and Louis Nell, set up a Bitcoin advocacy group called Bitcoin Consulting. Their entire task is to mobilize South Africans to challenge the rules. They created a website where anyone in South Africa could comment, personalize it with their own stories, and submit it directly to the Treasury Department. This is the best grassroots activism. Notably, they are backed by major encryption companies and advocacy groups. Mr. Val has publicly opposed the rules. Afrodax came out against them. badgers came out against them. These are not edge encryption brothers. These are legal, regulated financial service providers operating in South Africa who know what they're talking about. Ricky Araldis, chief executive of Orange Global Services, pointed out that anyone concerned about financial inclusion should worry about one thing. About 11 million South African adults still have no bank deposits. For these citizens, self-managed crypto assets are the main mechanism for saving, remitting money, and participating in the global economy. Mandatory crypto asset service provider intermediaries with related fees and KYC requirements directly exclude this group from the system. He was absolutely right. The rules hurt more than just crypto investors. They hurt the poorest and most vulnerable South Africans who use encryption to participate in the global economy because they have no access to traditional banking. The Bitcoin Czar group also pointed to another constitutional irritant. The broad powers to seize, stop and confiscate relate to Articles 22, 25, and 33 of the Constitution. Any restrictions on fundamental rights must be reasonable, proportionate, and clearly defined. The current draft relies on broad, undefined discretion and does not meet that legal standard. This is a legitimate constitutional argument. The rules could violate many parts of South Africa's constitution and are not even legally defensible. By late April, big crypto exchanges had opposed the rule, organized grassroots advocacy campaigns, constitutional experts questioned its effectiveness. Financial inclusion advocates warned of harm, and industry leaders publicly criticized the government. But the government has not changed course. A May 18 deadline looms. We don't know if they will actually enforce the rules in writing, change them, or repeal them altogether. But in fact, they publish these articles which tell you something important about the trend. If you don't live in South Africa, where there is no encryption, you might think it won't directly affect you. But that is why you should realize South Africa is a test case. What happened? Other countries may have regulatory blueprints. Consider South Africa, a major African economy, a moderately developed financial system, a country with extensive encryption, a country increasingly eager to control capital flows. That is the case in a country that could become a testing ground for more extreme encryption control methods. Let me introduce you to some of the ideas used in global encryption and put them in the right context. According to the latest data from 2025, the encryption adoption rate in South Africa was 19.6%, higher than 8.3% in the United States. Sub-Saharan Africa as a whole has shown explosive growth, with turnover reaching $25 billion. In March 2025, Nigeria and South Africa together accounted for the largest share of the operation, with stable currencies accounting for 43% of all cryptocurrency transactions. In sub-Saharan Africa, this is not fringe activity. This is mainstream financial activity in major parts of the world. What is really interesting is that a stable currency, usually pegged to the dollar, is one of SARB's biggest pain points. In a statement on why, they express concern about the impact of stablecoins on Rand. You have to understand that the South African rand is not a strong currency and has been under pressure for years. When people have the option of holding dollars through stablecoins, they sometimes choose dollars over rand to protect their purchasing power. From the central bank's perspective, this looks like capital flight. From the perspective of ordinary people, it is only a basic economic guarantee. The government sees such regulation as a way to force people back into rand, back into the traditional financial system, back under their control. But if you care about financial freedom, you should worry. If South Africa succeeds, if they can really push people back into a state-controlled system through regulation, other governments will notice, other governments will follow suit. China already has extremely strict encryption laws. Most developed countries have at least some form of licensing and reporting requirement, but South Africa's proposal is different. This is not regulation. This is a ban disguised as regulation. The crypto community is gaining international attention. That has become an international issue. Legal experts in the United States, Britain, and Europe have begun analyzing the rules in terms of human rights and financial freedoms, because ultimately it is about the basic right to own and control your assets without government permission. Volkswagen Asani cited Nelson Mandela's vision of South Africa free of currency controls. Mr. Mandela said he clearly envisioned a South Africa without currency controls. The Treasury Department and the Reserve Bank, however, do not appear to have lifted currency controls, introducing tighter regulation under a different name. This is a powerful argument, not just about encryption. It is about where South Africa is going as a country. When you look at what Asani also pointed out, that the United States, Britain, France, Spain, Finland, Taiwan, and Singapore have all abolished foreign exchange controls, prospered. It is clear that this regulatory path is not just bad for encryption, that is bad for the South African economy. Young people, entrepreneurs, and innovators have left countries with tight capital controls, outflows, the brain drain accelerated, the economy stagnated. South Africa has threatened to hit itself by policing a major growth sector of its economy, pushing businesses and talent overseas, and in doing so, defending a currency under pressure for deeper economic reasons. There are things that don't get enough attention, but deserve attention. These rules may not actually stand up to legal challenges. South Africa has a constitution, the 1996 Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. That includes fairly strong protections for individual rights. Several legal experts noted that encryption rules could violate several of them. Section 25. Title: South Africa's Constitution explicitly protects property rights, saying that no one can arbitrarily deprive property. But the rules essentially allow the state to force someone to sell encryption software at a price set by the government. This is clearly a violation of property rights. Section 22. Freedom of trade. This section protects the right to engage in economic activity. Being forced to buy, sell, or transfer cryptocurrencies through approved intermediaries appears to be a clear restriction on trade freedom. Section 33. just administrative conduct. This requires reasonable, legal, and procedural justice. But the rules give law enforcement officials broad discretion with few safeguards. What are the reasonable reasons for seizing assets? Who decides? The rules did not say. Section 35, right to object to self-incrimination. That means a lot. The private key disclosure requirement in Article 25, Paragraph 5, essentially forces people to prove guilt by handing over asset keys. This is a direct violation of the right to oppose self-incrimination. When you have so many potential constitutional violations in a statute, you run into serious problems. The main problem. Farzam Ishani pointed to another law-related issue. The less restrictive means to achieve its goals, which are not described in the regulations. He was right. If governments want to prevent money laundering and crack down on illicit money flows, which they say they are trying to do, there are less intrusive ways to do so. They can demand reporting, not assets. They can enforce permits and KIC requirements without criminalizing self-detention. They can do what other developed countries do. Instead, they chose the nuclear option. They make crypto ownership a crime above an undefined threshold. They have criminalized refusing to hand over encryption keys. They have made it illegal to move money across borders without permission. This is disproportionate and unconstitutional. Interestingly, legal issues may ultimately be decided by the courts, not the Treasury Department. If the rules are enforced and challenged, South African courts could overturn them outright. That would embarrass the government and undermine its entire regulatory framework. But it is a process that could take years. At the same time, uncertainty and the threat of criminal penalties will cool South Africa's encryption efforts. That may be the point. That may be the goal, to scare people away from encryption without having to enforce regulations permanently. This is regulatory intimidation. Let me talk very directly about the impact of these regulations on people. While this is a financial and legal issue, it comes down to people. Personal passcode holder. If you are a South African who owns Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any other cryptocurrency, these rules create an impossible situation. You either declare your shares, risking seizure or forced sale, or fail to declare them, which could result in criminal penalties if found, or move them out of the country, which is illegal under these rules. There are no good options. This is regulatory coercion. Non-bank depositors. Ricky Araldis argues eloquently that 11 million South Africans have no bank deposits. For many of them, cryptocurrencies are not investment vehicles at all. This is their bank account. That is how they save. That is how they receive remittances from family members who work overseas. That is how they participate in the global economy. The rules would effectively exclude these people from encryption systems, forcing them to use regulated intermediaries that charge fees. For people living in poverty, these costs can be devastating. Encryption. Legal and regulated crypto exchanges in South Africa, like Valor and Afrodax, are facing a choice. adapt to an impossible regulatory framework, or simply leave South Africa. Some adapt because it is their business, but others leave. In the process, South Africa will lose business, jobs, and taxes. Faza Masani made it clear that the rules could expel encryption and investors. He was right. If any crypto entrepreneur could go to El Salvador, Portugal, or other places more conducive to innovation, why would he set up a factory in South Africa under such a regulatory regime? Young people and entrepreneurs, South Africa's brain drain is already a serious problem, and educated young people are leaving the country in search of better opportunities. Rules make things worse. If you're a young South African with an interest in blockchain technology or encryption innovation, you'll look elsewhere for work. Tourism and international business. What happens when the International Encryption Conference is scheduled to take place in South Africa, or when foreign encryption entrepreneurs try to enter the country? If they carry hardware wallets or have extensive encryption software, they could be held at the border and forced to hand over their private keys. How many legitimate business travelers accept the risk? 0. Financial inclusion goals. Ironically, the South African government has made financial inclusion a clear goal. That is part of a commitment to sustainable development goals. But the rules directly undermine them by making it harder for people without bank accounts to participate in the economy. Rand. Here is the long-term meaning. What will people do if they cannot legally hold encryption software if they are convicted of trying to protect their wealth? They moved them out of the country. In other ways, they went underground. They use informal channels. They are doing exactly what the government is trying to stop. The rules did not strengthen Mr. Rand. They weaken it and drive capital flight. They pushed people into unregulated financial channels. So, what is our position now? By the end of April 2026, the public comment period ends on May 18. Between now and then, a large number of individuals, businesses, and advocacy groups will submit objections to the regulations. Will the government listen? That is uncertain. They have made clear that they are concerned about the formal promise to keep encryption under government control. It remains to be seen whether this is achieved through this particular regulatory framework or through its revision. Let me show you what might happen. Scenario 1. Written implementation. The government largely followed the bill. Crypto holders must declare their holdings. Many have tried to move assets out of the country before the deadline. The Treasury Department began to implement it. Constitutional challenges. The rules could be overturned by the courts, but they would not cause widespread damage. In the meantime, Scenario 2. Revised regulations. The government listened to some feedback and revised rules, raised filing thresholds, and softened language around asset seizures, but retained criminal penalties and reporting requirements. These rules are easier to pass constitutional review, but they still have a chilling effect on encryption. Scenario 3. Regulatory delays. The government faced enough political and international pressure to delay implementation, saying it needed more time to improve the regulations and announcing further consultations. That could last months or years. At the same time, South Africa's encryption continues, but legal uncertainty hangs over everything. Scenario 4. Withdrawal. The government has received enough feedback, including from international financial institutions and trading partners, to withdraw or substantially reduce regulation and adopt more traditional forms of regulation that focus on licensing and reporting rather than control and seizure. My honest assessment, we may be moving toward scenario 2 or scenario 3. The government appears too committed to control to fully withdraw, but it may revise the most extreme provisions to address obvious constitutional issues. To be sure, South Africa's encryption industry will be greatly affected. The most optimistic interpretation is that the final rules will be annoying, but navigable. The pessimistic explanation is that they will be enforceable and will work as expected, pushing encryption underground and overseas. Either way, South Africa is moving away from crypto-friendly jurisdictions. The business environment is changing. Regulatory uncertainty is growing. Compliance costs are rising. Let me tell you, for myself, even if you're not in South Africa, it affects you in several ways. First, it was a warning sign. When a major economic pole shifts to encryption controls, it is a signal that regulation could shift elsewhere. Look at this. If South Africa succeeds in enforcing the rules, it is expected that other governments, especially in developing economies, will observe and learn from their practices. Second, it shows a fundamental tension. The government wants capital controls. Encryption essentially eliminates the government's ability to control capital. The two are incompatible. Encryption is a growing threat to governments as they feel more pressure on their currencies and capital flows. Such regulation is expected to be more, not less. Third, it is a reminder of why decentralization actually matters. If your encryption is done on a central exchange in a poorly regulated country, you are exposed. If your encryption password is self-protecting, you'll get more protection, at least, until you try to cash out in a regulated jurisdiction. This is the core dilemma of encryption adoption. Fourth, it affects global encryption adoption and pricing. South Africa is an important part of emerging market encryption. If such activities are criminalized or moved underground, they will affect global liquidity, volatility, and adoption trends. Finally, it is a matter of principle. If you believe in financial freedom, if you believe that people should have the right to own and control their assets without government permission, then what is happening in South Africa should worry you, because if it happened there, it could have happened somewhere else. It should be understood that on the 17th of April 2026, the South African government basically declared war on cryptocurrencies through bureaucratic and distant regulatory language. But it actually represents one of the most aggressive encryption restrictions proposed by any major economy in recent years. The rules criminalize self-protection, require the declaration of assets to the state, allow the seizure of assets without clear due process, require mandatory disclosure of encryption keys, and impose a 5-year prison sentence for non-compliance. They are not regulation. They are prohibitions. They are happening now. South Africa's crypto community has mobilized through organizations like Bitcoin Czar. They challenged the constitution. They made their voices heard. But the outcome remains uncertain. And that uncertainty is itself a form of control. This is regulatory intimidation. What happens in South Africa in the coming months will affect millions of South Africans whose financial access and freedoms are threatened. A global test of how far governments will push for cryptocurrency controls. Stay informed. Be vigilant. Remember, the right to control your money is not granted to you voluntarily by the government. That is what you have to protect. If you find this section valuable, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe. In our review, we broke down the major financial and encryption developments missed by other channels, and I would like to hear what you think. Do you think these regulations in South Africa will really be implemented? And what are the encryption regulations in your country? Let's talk. Thanks for watching. See you next time.